Maggie stared at the small, flickering light of her laptop screen. Its harsh glow a far cry from the warmth she used to dream of. It was 3:14 a.m., but the silence of the apartment in South Philly felt like it had been her companion for much longer than just a few hours. The faint hum of the nearby train tracks vibrated through the thin walls, a sound that had become background noise over the years. She could hear the distant shout of a street vendor, trying to catch the last late-night customers. The city, alive with all its contradictions, never slept. Neither did she. The apartment, small and cluttered with old furniture, was a reflection of her life so far. It wasn't much, but it had always been enough. Maggie had learned to make it work, just like she'd learned to make everything work. But the walls had witnessed far too many of her failures, too many long nights spent working on things that never seemed to pay off. The walls here told a different story. They had seen her triumphs too. They had witnessed her fight, and they had heard her tears, the ones she kept hidden, the ones that came when she was too tired to put on the mask anymore. The room was quiet except for the tapping of Maggie's fingers on the keyboard. Every keystroke was deliberate, every word a product of years of disappointment and determination. She was so close now. The screen in front of her flickered once again, and Maggie hesitated. She had spent the past few months piecing together the application for the project manager position at a tech startup in Chicago. Sure, she had no experience in tech, but she had more than a decade of experience in organizational management, and she knew that was more than enough to start. She had learned the hard way that it wasn't just about being good at what you did. It was about making people believe you could do it. Maggie wasn't good at lying, but she had mastered the art of showing people what they needed to see. She hit send. A deep breath. She had done everything she could. Now, there was nothing left to do but wait. The clock ticked. The light on the street outside flickered again, casting strange, angular shadows across the room. Maggie leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling, letting the silence wash over her for a moment. Her mind wandered to the past, to the people who had tried to shape her into something she wasn't. For years, it had felt like the world was conspiring against her, as if everyone knew she was just a small-town girl with no business thinking she could rise above the limitations they had placed on her. Her mother had always told her that dreams were nice, but reality paid the bills, and that she should focus on getting a job that actually meant something. The same words had come from countless friends and family members over the years, but Maggie wasn't one to let go of her dreams. She'd fought too hard to let them slip away now. The email alert on her phone buzzed. She froze. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she wondered if it was the rejection she had been dreading. But when she saw who the email was from, a jolt of hope surged through her chest. It was a notification for a follow-up meeting. She quickly opened the email. It was her application. They'd requested a follow-up call. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled slightly as she clicked on the link to confirm the call. This was it. The moment she had been working for. All those late nights, all those quiet hours in the apartment where no one saw her struggle. This was her chance. She was no longer the woman who was overlooked. She was no longer the woman who was told to keep dreaming. And yet, she still didn't believe it. Maggie knew she was capable. But when it came to herself, that was a different story. She stood up, pacing the room as her thoughts collided with each other. What if I'm not enough? What if they see through me? She could already hear the voices of doubt creeping in. The voices that had always been there, telling her she didn't belong, that people like her were meant to clean offices, not run them. But these doubts, these were old ghosts, ones she had already faced and learned to quiet. The phone buzzed again, this time with an incoming call from her best friend, Sarah. Maggie smiled slightly. Sarah was one of the few people who had stuck by her side through thick and thin. She was the one who had listened to her rant when things felt hopeless, the one who had been there when Maggie had wanted to give up, the one who believed in her when Maggie couldn't believe in herself. Maggie picked up. "You got the call, didn't you?" Sarah's voice was light, but Maggie could hear the excitement behind it. She hadn't told Sarah about the follow-up yet. "Yeah," Maggie replied quietly, sitting back down at the table. "They want to talk to me. They want a follow-up." Well, you already know you've got this, right? Sarah's voice was full of confidence. You've been ready for this for years. Maggie smiled. It was always Sarah who gave her that push when she needed it most. But even with Sarah's encouragement, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this wasn't her moment. The fear, the uncertainty, the hesitation. These things still held her back. She had a job. She had a life. But was it everything she dreamed of? No, not even close. She glanced at the phone screen. She had a meeting to prepare for. She had to figure out how to sell herself, to prove to them that she was worth more than they could ever imagine. Maggie was so used to being the one on the sidelines, watching others take the credit for her ideas. Now she was about to step into the ring. And though her heart was racing, Maggie didn't think she was ready to back down anymore. Sarah, what if they don't believe in me? Maggie's voice cracked. The doubt she had buried deep inside started to seep out. You've got this, Maggie. You've always had this. They don't need to believe in you. You just need to believe in yourself. Maggie closed her eyes for a moment, taking in Sarah's words. For the first time in a long time, the walls of self-doubt started to feel a little less imposing. After the call ended, Maggie stood by the window, looking out at the city. The street was quiet now, the vendors gone, the hum of the train slowing down. For a moment, it felt like the world was standing still, waiting for her to make her move. She wasn't that young girl anymore, the one who had listened to everyone's doubts. She was a woman who had learned that her dreams weren't something to apologize for. She was a woman who had made the choice to rise above the expectations and show the world what she was capable of. The question wasn't if she could make it. The question was when they would realize she already had. Maggie turned back to the desk, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. This was the moment she had been waiting for. No more fear, no more hesitation. She would take this opportunity, and she would show the world just who Maggie Wilson really was. The next morning felt like any other, except that it wasn't. Maggie stood in front of the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on her face, trying to shake off the weight of what had happened. The email from the startup was still fresh in her mind, even as she dressed in her faded uniform for her shift at the local diner. The coffee machine gurgled in the background as she slipped into her apron, tying it in the same practiced motion that had become second nature over the years. The routine was comforting, predictable, and she tried to hold on to that small sense of control. It was the only thing that kept the waves of uncertainty from crashing in. Her phone buzzed with a notification, and for a moment, Maggie hesitated before checking it. It was the same startup company. Her stomach flipped. She opened the email with a racing pulse, hoping for a different outcome. The words on the screen were blunt, sharp, and final. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with another candidate. Her heart sank, a familiar feeling rising up inside her. The feeling of defeat that had taunted her for years. She stared at the screen, at the harshness of their rejection. The logical part of her knew that it wasn't personal, that it was just the nature of the process. But the emotional part, well, that part felt like it was drowning. Not good enough, she thought. Never good enough. Maggie closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the tears well up, but she refused to let them fall. Crying had never gotten her anywhere, and it wouldn't get her anywhere now. She had faced this before. She had stood on the sidelines for too long. It didn't matter how much she wanted to change things. The world would always find a way to remind her of her place. But no, she wasn't going to stay there. Not anymore. Not this time. The coffee pot beeped loudly, snapping Maggie out of her thoughts. She grabbed a cup and poured herself a drink, the hot liquid searing her hands, but she barely noticed. She stood there for a moment, lost in her thoughts, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. She'd prepared for this. She had done everything right, everything she could think of. Maybe that was the problem. She had tried to play by their rules to fit into their mold. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. She took another deep breath. Stop. You're not a victim here. Get up, dust yourself off, and keep going. Maggie had learned that a long time ago. Failure was not a reason to stop. It was just another obstacle to push through. She had done it before. She would do it again. Maggie set her coffee down on the counter and pulled her phone out of her pocket. The rejection email was still on the screen, but she tapped it away with a swipe. She didn't need to dwell on it. She needed to focus on what came next. The morning shift at the diner dragged on. The usual group of regulars came in. Old men hunched over their newspapers, moms with kids in tow, and couples who spoke in hushed tones like their conversations were too important for the world to hear. Maggie moved between the tables like she had a million times before. Her movements automatic, her smile bright but fading at the edges. The rejection email still lingered in the back of her mind, but she pushed it away. It wasn't the time to let her emotions get the best of her. Not in front of these people. Not when her paycheck depended on staying calm and collected. But then, as she delivered a coffee to the usual table in the back, one of the regulars, an older man named Mr. Hollis, made a comment that hit too close to home. "You know," he said, his thick glasses perched on the end of his nose, "I used to dream too, you know? When I was your age, I thought I could be anything. But life just, it has a way of keeping you in your place." Maggie froze for a second, caught off guard by the words. She glanced at him, his grizzled face framed by silver hair, his eyes distant, like they were lost somewhere far away. She could tell he didn't mean anything by it, but the words still stung. "Yeah," she replied softly, forcing a smile. "Life can do that sometimes." The moment passed quickly, but it lingered in her mind, gnawing at her insides. She wasn't like Mr. Hollis. She couldn't let herself be that person who gave up on their dreams. She couldn't. The rest of the day dragged by in much the same way, a blur of faces and coffee refills, her mind constantly drifting back to the rejection, to the overwhelming weight of doubt that had settled back in. She had been so close. That evening, Maggie collapsed into the worn armchair by her window, the hum of the city just outside, but her thoughts completely elsewhere. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Sarah. "I know it hurts, but keep your head up. You're going to make it. They can't see you yet, but they will." Maggie stared at the message, feeling a surge of frustration rise up in her chest. Why was it so easy for Sarah to stay positive? Maggie had tried. She really had. But nothing seemed to work. She had poured everything into that application, done everything she thought would impress them. But it wasn't enough. She typed back a quick response. "Thanks, I appreciate it. Just need some time to figure this out." Sarah would never understand. Sarah had always had the luxury of believing in herself, even when things didn't go her way. Maggie wished she could be more like that, but that wasn't her reality. Her reality was this apartment, this dead-end job, and the creeping sense of failure that was always just beneath the surface. Later that night, Maggie sat at her desk, the glow of her computer screen illuminating the room. She was staring at the application form for another job, another company, when the phone rang. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't pick up, but something told her she should. "Hello," Maggie said, trying to sound more composed than she felt. "Hi, is this Maggie Wilson?" A warm voice asked on the other end. "Yeah, speaking. I'm calling from the startup in Chicago. We just wanted to follow up on your application. We were very impressed by your work, and we'd like to schedule a call to discuss your qualifications further." Maggie's heart skipped a beat. Was this some kind of joke? Had they just forgotten about the rejection email they'd sent? The voice on the other end continued, "We think you could be a great fit for the project manager position. How does Thursday at noon sound?" Maggie sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Was this real? Was it possible? "Thursday works," she finally said, trying to keep her voice steady. The conversation ended soon after, but Maggie couldn't stop herself from smiling. There was still hope. That night, Maggie lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. The silence in her room was almost deafening. She had just received a callback from the same company that had rejected her hours earlier. They wanted her. It was a second chance. But was she truly ready for it? She didn't know the answer. But one thing was certain. She wasn't about to let this opportunity slip through her fingers. She couldn't afford to. Not anymore. The morning of her follow-up call arrived, and Maggie had no idea how to prepare. She had told herself over and over that this was her chance. But now that the moment was finally here, she was consumed by uncertainty. What if they realize I'm not the one for the job? What if I'm just fooling myself into thinking I can actually do this? It was 10:45 a.m. when Maggie pulled herself together enough to sit at her small kitchen table, laptop open in front of her. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting faint lines across the worn wood, but it did little to soothe the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Her phone rested next to her, its screen dark, but she knew that in a few minutes, everything was about to change. She checked her appearance one last time, even though she knew that the video call was going to be a casual one. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. At least, that's what she told herself. But she wanted to be ready. The reality was that she was terrified. She ran her fingers through her hair and pulled it back into a loose ponytail. It wasn't perfect, but neither was she. That's what she told herself as a reminder. It wasn't about perfection. It was about honesty, authenticity, and showing up. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting time, her nerves settled a little, only to be replaced by the familiar weight of doubt. Maybe they'll realize I don't belong in this room with them. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. She took a deep breath and forced herself to focus. There was no time for second-guessing now. At exactly noon, her phone rang. The name of the company flashed on the screen. Maggie's heart leaped into her throat, and for a moment, she almost didn't pick up. What if it was another rejection? What if she had misread the entire situation? But then she thought of her mother's voice, the voice that had always told her to keep going even when it felt like the world was against her. She'd spent her whole life hearing that, and now it was her turn to make it mean something. She answered the call. "Hello, Maggie?" The voice on the other end was warm but professional. "Yes, this is Maggie Wilson," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hi, Maggie. This is Andrea from Startup Tech. Thank you for your time today. We're very excited to speak with you. We were impressed by your resume and your background, and we'd love to hear more about your experience and how you'd approach the project manager role here." Maggie's mind went blank. She had prepared for this. She had run through every potential question in her head, but now that it was time, words seemed to escape her. She took another deep breath, feeling her pulse quicken. "Thank you for the opportunity," Maggie managed, her voice gaining strength as she went on. "I've worked in management for years, and I've always believed in the power of bringing people together. In my current role, I've had the chance to collaborate with teams from all different backgrounds, and what I've learned is that effective management is about more than just overseeing people. It's about understanding their individual strengths and helping them develop as a unit. I believe that's the key to long-term success in any project." She paused, hoping her words didn't sound too rehearsed. There was a beat of silence, and for a moment, Maggie wondered if she had said too much or too little. But then Andrea spoke again. "That's great to hear, Maggie. Your approach to team management is exactly what we're looking for. Now, I want to get a better idea of how you handle conflict in a team. Can you walk me through a time when you had to resolve a challenging situation between team members?" Maggie's chest tightened. The question was a good one. It was a challenge, but one that was familiar. She thought back to the time when she was working as an assistant manager at a small marketing firm in New York City. There had been a major disagreement between two key team members, and the whole project had started to fall apart. Maggie had been the one to step in not just as a leader, but as someone who understood both perspectives. It had been difficult, but by helping the team members understand each other's positions, she'd been able to create a compromise that worked for everyone. "I had a situation in my previous role where two key team members had opposing views on the direction of a project," Maggie began, her voice gaining confidence. "It wasn't a personal issue, they just had very different work styles. One was more detail-oriented, while the other was a big-picture thinker. They clashed constantly, and the project was suffering because of it. I sat down with both of them separately at first to really understand where each person was coming from. Once I understood their perspectives, I brought them together and facilitated a discussion where we could work through their differences. The outcome wasn't perfect, but we reached a compromise that allowed us to move forward with the project. I learned that it's not always about who's right or wrong. It's about finding a solution that works for everyone. Andrea paused, and Maggie held her breath. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need, Andrea replied. We love the way you approach conflict resolution. I think you would fit in perfectly with our team here. We'll be in touch soon with next steps. Maggie's heart fluttered in her chest. This was it. Exchanges, the call ended. Maggie sat there for a moment, letting the words sink in. She had done it. She had made it through the toughest part, and now everything felt possible. The weight that had been pressing down on her chest for so long had suddenly lightened. For the first time in years, Maggie allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was her time. The afternoon passed in a blur. Maggie made herself a simple lunch, just a bowl of soup and some bread, but she could barely taste it. Her mind kept returning to the call. She had given them a glimpse of what she could do, and they hadn't shut her down. Instead, they had listened. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Later that evening, Maggie found herself on the phone again with Sarah. They called back, Maggie said, her voice barely above a whisper, as though saying it too loudly would jinx everything. See? I told you it would happen. Sarah's voice was jubilant. You're not just dreaming, Maggie. You've got this. Maggie smiled, but it was a quiet smile. The doubt still lingered, but it was starting to fade, replaced by something much stronger. Hope. I don't know, Sarah, Maggie replied softly, glancing out of the window at the city below. Maybe this time it's real. Maggie spent the rest of the evening processing everything. The phone call, the rejection, the fear. Everything she had carried with her for years had led her here, to this moment. And even though the future was still uncertain, she realized that she no longer had to carry the weight of her doubts alone. She was ready to step forward, to face whatever came next with the quiet strength that had always been inside her. Maggie woke up the next morning to the sound of her phone buzzing. It was 7:45 a.m., a time she'd come to associate with the few hours of peace before the storm of the day began. She groggily reached for her phone, expecting to see a few reminders and messages from friends, but what she found instead was an email from the startup. Her heart skipped a beat. She opened it carefully, her breath held in anticipation. We are pleased to inform you that you've been selected for the project manager position at Startup Tech. Maggie blinked. She read it again just to make sure. You've been selected. The words sank in slowly, the weight of their meaning not fully hitting her until she took a deep breath and released it with a long exhale. Her chest felt tight, but this time it was the kind of tightness that came with victory, not fear. She had done it. After all the rejection, all the doubts, she had made it. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a reality, and it was all her own doing. She clutched the phone to her chest for a moment, allowing herself the smallest pause of celebration before the overwhelming reality of the situation set in. There was no time to waste. She had worked her entire life for this moment, and now she had to prove herself. It wasn't enough to just get in. She had to stay in. She had to succeed. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Sarah. I knew it. I told you it was just a matter of time. You're going to crush it, Maggie. Maggie smiled softly and texted back. I did it, Sarah. I actually did it. It felt surreal, but in the best possible way. Maggie didn't dwell on the email for long, though. There was work to do. She had to get ready for the next chapter of her life. The following weeks passed in a blur of excitement and nervousness. Maggie threw herself into preparing for her new role, studying the startup's past projects, reaching out to the team, and putting together a plan for how she would approach the first few months in the position. She wanted to hit the ground running, to prove that she was more than just the girl they had hired on a whim. But the challenge wasn't just professional, it was personal. Maggie had always known that she was capable of more, but now, she had to learn how to embrace her success without the weight of imposter syndrome pulling her down. She wasn't used to being seen as more than just good enough. And yet, that's exactly what they had told her. One evening, while scrolling through her emails, Maggie came across something unexpected. It was an invitation to speak at an industry conference in San Francisco. The startup had recommended her to speak on a panel about team management and leadership. Maggie's first instinct was to say no. The thought of standing in front of a room full of strangers, all eyes on her as she spoke about something she had only just begun to understand, terrified her. But then, something clicked. This wasn't just another hurdle. This was an opportunity to show the world that she wasn't just a survivor of her circumstances. She was a leader in her own right. She hesitated for only a moment before replying with a simple yes. Her heart raced as the confirmation email came through. It was official. Maggie was going to speak at a conference. The day of the conference arrived faster than Maggie had expected. She flew out to San Francisco the night before, her nerves barely contained as she boarded the plane. The city below was a patchwork of streets and lights, but her focus was entirely on the task at hand. It felt like the whole world was watching her, though she knew that wasn't true. The world had never been this interested in her before, but now it felt different. She wasn't just an assistant or a background player anymore. She was part of something bigger. She was going to make her mark. The conference hall was crowded, buzzing with excitement and conversation as Maggie took her seat on the panel. She glanced at the others on stage, all of them seasoned professionals with years of experience in the industry. They looked like they belonged. Maggie felt small in comparison, but she reminded herself that she had earned this moment, just like they had. The moderator turned to her first. "Maggie, your work has been recognized for its unique approach to team management. What's your key to creating a successful team dynamic?" Maggie cleared her throat and smiled, the words coming more easily than she had expected. "I believe that a successful team starts with understanding the strengths of each individual. It's not just about managing people, it's about empowering them. If you build a team where each person is valued for who they are and what they bring to the table, you'll create a culture of collaboration that fosters trust and accountability." She paused, looking at the audience. She could feel their attention on her, and for the first time in her life, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like power. "You know," Maggie continued, "I once worked in a place where I was told I wasn't capable of leading. I was always the one cleaning up the mess, always the one supporting others. But what I realized is that leadership isn't just about the title. It's about action. It's about leading by example." The room was silent, but Maggie could feel the shift. They were listening. After the panel, Maggie received praise from several attendees and even a few invitations to collaborate. She wasn't just a small-town girl anymore. She was someone people wanted to work with. But it wasn't the compliments that stayed with her. It was the realization that she was finally seeing the fruits of her labor, the result of years of hard work and quiet determination. Maggie had fought for this moment, and now that she had it, there was no turning back. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Told you you'd crush it. You're just getting started, Maggie. The world doesn't know what's coming." Maggie smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had never felt more at home in her own skin. That night, Maggie stood in her hotel room in San Francisco, looking out over the city skyline. The lights twinkled below her, but it was the light inside her that shone the brightest. She had come so far, and this was just the beginning. She had once been the girl who sat in the back, the one who was told to keep dreaming. But now, she was the one in the front, the one who had worked for everything she had earned. She wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time in her life, Maggie knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Maggie stood outside the sleek glass building in downtown Chicago, watching the city pulse with life around her. The hum of traffic, the honking of cabs, and the rush of busy professionals were all around her. But she stood still, gathering herself for the meeting that could solidify everything. This was her chance to step into the role she had fought for, the role that would allow her to prove once and for all that she belonged here. The startup had been growing fast, and now, as the newly hired project manager, Maggie was tasked with leading a key project that would determine the company's future in the competitive tech industry. It was a high-pressure job, but Maggie had always thrived under pressure. She had no time to hesitate, no time to question herself. This was it. As she walked through the revolving door of the building, she felt a small surge of pride. The glass walls, the polished floors, the sleek design. It all felt so foreign to her, so different from the small-town world she had come from. She had fought her way into this space, and now she was going to prove that she deserved to stay here. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. Meeting in conference room 2. Be prepared to present your first 90-day plan. Maggie's heart skipped a beat. The plan had taken her days to craft. She had worked late into the night, researching, analyzing, and outlining the vision she believed in. But now, with the clock ticking, her nerves crept back in. What if they didn't like it? What if they didn't see what she saw? She quickly silenced the doubt, stepping into the elevator. The doors closed with a soft whoosh, and she was alone with her thoughts. Maggie looked at her reflection in the polished elevator walls. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her blazer, though simple, fit her perfectly. She was ready. She had to be. When the elevator doors opened to the floor of the conference room, Maggie walked down the hallway, her heels clicking against the smooth marble. The room was just ahead, the door ajar, and she could already hear the low murmur of voices inside. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room fell silent as she entered, and all eyes turned toward her. There were 5 people at the table, all much more experienced than she was. The CEO, Andrea, was at the head of the table, her posture straight and confident. Next to her was Ethan, the senior project manager who had been with the company for years, and next to him sat Madison, the lead designer. Maggie also recognized Leo, the data analyst, and finally, across from them all, was her direct supervisor, Eric, who had hired her just a few weeks ago. "Good morning, Maggie," Andrea said, her voice warm but businesslike. "We've been looking forward to your presentation. Let's hear what you've got for us." Maggie nodded, forcing a calmness into her voice. "Thank you for the opportunity. I've spent the past few weeks reviewing our current projects and identifying areas where we can make improvements. What I've come up with is a 90-day plan that will focus on streamlining communication, setting clear milestones, and enhancing collaboration across all departments." She clicked her remote, and the first slide of her presentation appeared on the screen behind her. Maggie walked to the front of the room, her heart pounding, but she kept her posture steady. The first slide outlined her plan's objectives. 1. Improve internal communication between departments. 2. Set clear and achievable milestones. 3. Foster a collaborative environment that encourages innovative ideas. She continued to speak, her voice gaining confidence with every word. "We've already seen some progress in our tech department, but the lack of cohesive communication has led to missed deadlines and confusion. I believe we can improve by implementing regular cross-departmental meetings and a more streamlined task management system." She moved to the next slide, detailing specific tasks and projected outcomes. She spoke about shifting priorities and realigning the team's focus to ensure that they met the deadlines set for the upcoming product launch. Maggie could feel the weight of their eyes on her, but this time, she didn't let it intimidate her. This was her time. She had earned the right to be here. She wasn't just the girl they had hired on a whim anymore. She was the one making the decisions. She was leading the charge. When she finished the presentation, the room was quiet. Maggie could feel the tension in the air, but she refused to break. Andrea was the first to speak. "Maggie, this is a solid plan. I can see you've put a lot of thought into this. What's your timeline for executing it?" Maggie took a deep breath and answered confidently. "I'd like to implement the first phase in the next 3 weeks. The team needs to get used to the new communication protocols, so I think it's best to roll it out gradually. By the end of the 90 days, we should have a fully integrated workflow that will allow us to meet our objectives more effectively." Ethan, the senior project manager, leaned forward in his chair, his arms crossed. "This is all well and good, Maggie, but how do you plan to handle resistance? You know as well as I do that change is often met with pushback, especially from senior members of the team." Maggie didn't hesitate. She had anticipated this question. "I understand that change isn't easy, but I've always believed in leading by example. I plan to demonstrate the value of these changes by incorporating them into my own daily routine first. I'll also be involving the senior team members in the planning process, so they feel more invested in the change." There was a brief silence as the team absorbed her response. Maggie could feel the weight of the room's scrutiny, but she refused to waver. Andrea nodded. I like your approach. It's pragmatic, and it puts the emphasis on collaboration, which is exactly what we need. I think we can move forward with this. Maggie's heart swelled with pride. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just a passive participant in the conversation. She was driving it. She had an idea, and they were listening. Thank you, Maggie said, offering a sincere smile. I'm looking forward to working with all of you to make this a success. As the meeting wrapped up, the team members began filing out of the room. Maggie stood there for a moment, staring at the now empty table. Her nerves, her doubts, everything had melted away. She had just led her first meeting, and it had gone exactly as she had hoped. Later that afternoon, Maggie walked through the halls of the office, a quiet smile on her face. She had done it. She had faced the challenge, taken the reins, and come out on top. She was no longer just trying to prove that she belonged. Now, she was showing them that she was more than capable. As she walked to her desk, her phone buzzed. It was an email from Andrea. Maggie, I just wanted to let you know that I'm impressed with how you handled the meeting today. You've got the makings of a true leader. Keep up the great work. Maggie sat back in her chair, the weight of her success finally sinking in. She wasn't just a project manager anymore. She was someone people could count on, and that was a feeling she had never known before. Maggie stood at the window of her new office, watching the Chicago skyline stretch out beneath her, the city a vibrant blend of light and motion. It had been 3 months since she'd started at Startup Tech, and the transition had been nothing short of a whirlwind. In those few months, Maggie had been immersed in the chaos of the startup world. The long meetings, the ever-shifting priorities, the tight deadlines, and the constant pressure to innovate. But through it all, she had found her footing. She had earned her place among people who had once seemed untouchable. She had found her rhythm. But now, a new challenge loomed on the horizon, one that could change everything. Maggie had been called into an emergency meeting with the company's executive team. The email came early in the morning, an hour before her usual start time, and though it didn't provide much detail, Maggie knew it was serious. Startup Tech had just received a large proposal from a major client, a multinational corporation that wanted to work with them on a high-profile project. This could be the deal that solidified their place in the tech industry, the one that propelled them from a promising startup to a recognized leader in the field. But it wasn't going to be easy. Maggie sat down in the conference room, feeling the weight of everyone's expectations on her shoulders. The team was already assembled when she arrived. Andrea, the CEO, Ethan, the senior project manager, Leo, the data analyst, Madison, the lead designer, and Eric, her direct supervisor. They all looked up as she entered, their faces serious. Andrea spoke first. Maggie, we're in a bit of a bind here. The client is ready to move forward, but they've asked for a significant change to the scope of the project. The timeline has been shortened, and they're requesting that we deliver much more than we originally proposed. We're talking about scaling up our operations by nearly double in a matter of weeks. Maggie's pulse quickened. She had anticipated a challenge, but this was something else. A request like this could break the team, especially given the limited resources they had at their disposal. The pressure was intense, and she felt the weight of it on her chest. I understand, Maggie said, trying to keep her voice steady. But if we're going to do this, we need to be realistic about what we can deliver. We can't sacrifice quality for speed. Eric, sitting across the table, nodded. Exactly. We need a strategy that allows us to scale quickly without compromising our core values. We've built a reputation for quality, and I'm not willing to let that go just for the sake of a big paycheck. Maggie glanced at the others around the table. Ethan was already furiously typing on his laptop, no doubt running the numbers. Leo was deep in thought, tapping his pen against his notepad. Madison, the lead designer, appeared to be running through potential design changes in her mind. I have a few ideas, Maggie continued, but we need to focus on 3 things. First, we need to identify what can be streamlined without losing the essence of what makes this project unique. Second, we need to delegate tasks effectively. This will require cross-departmental collaboration. Third, we need to communicate clearly with the client and set realistic expectations. We don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. There was a moment of silence as everyone absorbed her words. Then, Andrea spoke again, her tone more serious. Maggie, I need you to take charge of this. You're the one with the management experience. I'm putting you in charge of this deal. If we're going to pull this off, it's going to be because of your leadership. The weight of Andrea's words hit Maggie hard. She was now the one responsible for ensuring this deal succeeded. It wasn't just about managing a team. It was about managing an entire project that could change the trajectory of the company. Her mind raced as she processed the details. She could feel the pressure mounting, but Maggie had. Down, Maggie said, her voice firm. I'll get started right away. As the meeting ended, Maggie stood up to leave, but Andrea stopped her. Maggie, Andrea said, her voice low but full of conviction. This is your moment. Take it. Maggie nodded, her heart pounding. She didn't know how she was going to make it work, but she had no choice. The team was counting on her, and the company was counting on her. She had to lead them to success. The following days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and countless revisions to the project plan. Maggie worked closely with every department to ensure that everyone was aligned, that the tasks were being delegated appropriately, and that no one was overloaded. She learned more about the intricacies of the project than she ever expected to, and with every conversation, every decision, she felt herself growing more confident in her ability to lead. But there were moments when she felt overwhelmed, when the sheer weight of the responsibility threatened to crush her. She would wake up at 4 a.m. with a racing mind, scrambling to figure out how to handle the next challenge. But each time she felt the pressure building, Maggie reminded herself that she was capable, that she had been given this opportunity for a reason. 1 week before the final presentation to the client, Maggie stood in front of the team again, this time in the conference room. The presentation slides were up on the screen, and everyone was ready to go over the final details. They had worked tirelessly to get to this point, and Maggie could feel the tension in the room as they prepared to face the client. We've made some major strides, Maggie said, her voice calm but steady. But we need to ensure that we're presenting a unified front. This is our chance to prove that we can deliver on what we've promised. And more. Ethan nodded. We're ready. The numbers are solid, and the timeline looks feasible. Madison added, the designs are all set. We're good to go. Maggie took a deep breath. It was now or never. All right, she said. Let's do this. The client meeting was tense. The room was filled with executives who had no time to waste, and Maggie could feel their eyes on her as she presented the updated plan. She outlined the timeline, explained the adjustments they had made to the project scope, and reassured them that they were capable of handling the increased workload. As the meeting wrapped up, Maggie's heart was still racing, but she could sense the shift in the room. The client was impressed, their concerns addressed. Maggie had successfully guided the conversation, made adjustments where needed, and shown them that the team could handle whatever came their way. When the meeting ended, Andrea gave Maggie a brief, but approving nod. You did it, she said simply. Maggie felt a rush of pride. The deal had been won. The team had delivered. And most importantly, Maggie had proven to herself that she was capable of leading a project that would shape the future of the company. That evening, Maggie sat at her desk, staring at the congratulatory emails flooding her inbox. The weight of the past few months, of all the hard work, the doubt, the fear, finally felt like it was worth it. She had faced the challenge head-on, and she had emerged victorious. But this wasn't just a win for the company. This was a win for Maggie. She had taken control of her own destiny, and now, she was no longer just fighting for a seat at the table. She was leading the charge. Maggie wasn't used to being quoted, especially not in the way she was starting to be. First, it was just the little things. A few team members would reference something she'd said in a meeting. Her ideas would pop up in emails, mentioned with a passing acknowledgement. But as the weeks passed, something changed. She noticed it most during the Monday morning team check-ins, those half-hour slots where everyone gathered virtually to discuss progress and set goals for the week. The conversation would start with updates, who had done what the next steps were. But then, inevitably, someone would say, well, as Maggie suggested last week, it wasn't a big deal. Not at first. But then it happened more frequently. Her strategies, the ones she'd introduced so carefully, were no longer just her ideas. They were the team's ideas, the company's ideas. And suddenly, Maggie found herself at the center of it all. One particular morning, as the team gathered around their virtual meeting space, Ethan was the first to speak. He was the senior project manager, a man who had years of experience, but today, he leaned forward with a seriousness that caught Maggie's attention. You know, I was thinking about something Maggie mentioned last week. The way we approach cross-department collaboration. It's not just about getting things done, it's about how we get things done. And that small shift in perspective has really changed the way we're working. Maggie felt her throat tighten. She wasn't used to this. She'd always been the one who listened, the one who gave ideas, not the one who was spoken about. But there it was, her words, being repeated with respect and intention. She didn't interrupt, just listened as the team members began nodding and adding to the conversation. Madison, the lead designer, chimed in. Exactly. It's making a huge difference in how we approach each phase of the project. We're not just trying to finish tasks. We're making sure we're doing them in a way that truly supports one another. Maggie leaned back in her chair, allowing herself the space to breathe. This was it. This was the moment when she realized that what she had said, the vision she had outlined, was no longer just in her head. It was part of the team's language now. It had become a shared understanding, something they all believed in. And it wasn't just in these meetings. Over the next few weeks, Maggie's ideas continued to permeate the company culture. They weren't just being referenced in the meetings, they were being implemented in the workflow. Each department, whether it was the tech team, the design team, or the marketing team, had started to mirror the collaborative strategies Maggie had advocated for. She had become the unspoken leader of this shift, the quiet force behind the company's evolving dynamics. One afternoon, Maggie received a surprise email from Eric, her direct supervisor. He was the one who had hired her, the one who had seen something in her when others had not. Maggie, I've been watching your progress closely over the past few months. I've been really impressed with the changes you've brought to the team's culture. You've not only gained the team's trust, but you've also made your mark in a way that's hard to ignore. Keep it up. I think you're ready for the next step. Maggie sat back in her chair, the words lingering in her mind. Ready for the next step? The next step was the one thing she'd always dreamed of, but never thought she'd actually have to face. Eric had been telling her that it was coming, an official promotion, a bigger role within the company. But until now, Maggie had always assumed it was just something far off, a distant possibility that she'd have to fight for. But this email felt real, and it made her realize something. She hadn't just arrived at this point by chance. She had earned it, through all the setbacks, all the moments of doubt, and all the hours spent pouring her heart into her work. She had finally proven to herself that she could rise to the occasion. That same week, Maggie was invited to a meeting with Andrea, the CEO, and a few other senior leaders in the company. The purpose was simple. Maggie's progress had been noticed, and now, they needed to discuss her future with the company. Maggie wasn't sure what to expect, but she'd been in enough meetings to know that her ideas and her leadership had started to gain real traction. When she entered the sleek conference room, Andrea greeted her with a warm smile. Maggie, please sit. We've been wanting to have this conversation with you for a while now. Your work has been exemplary. You've taken the reins in your role and delivered results we didn't even anticipate. We want to make sure you're in the right position to continue growing with the company. Maggie nodded, trying to keep her composure. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she was unsure of what to say. Andrea continued. We're looking at you for a more senior role, a leadership position. You'd be managing multiple projects at once, overseeing a larger team, and helping shape the company's direction on a strategic level. We think you're ready. Maggie's heart raced. This was it. This was the opportunity she had dreamed of when she first stepped into this industry. And yet, part of her hesitated. Was she ready? Could she truly handle this new level of responsibility? Before she could respond, Andrea added, "But I want to be clear. This isn't just about your technical skills, Maggie. It's about your vision, your ability to inspire those around you. We need someone who can lead not just by directing, but by empowering. And from what I've seen, you're exactly the person for the job." Maggie sat back in her chair, processing Andrea's words. She had heard praise before, but this felt different. It wasn't just about the work anymore. It was about her as a leader, as someone who had become integral to the company's success. "I'm honored," Maggie finally said, her voice steady. "I've worked hard for this, and I believe in what we're building here. I'll do everything I can to help the company reach its goals." Andrea smiled, her eyes meeting Maggie's. "I have no doubt you'll exceed our expectations. Welcome to the leadership team, Maggie." The next few days were a blur of excitement and new responsibilities. Maggie met with the other leaders, began taking on a more hands-on role in overseeing multiple projects, and started to develop strategies for the company's growth. The pressure was intense, but Maggie was no stranger to pressure. She had faced the doubt, the rejection, the obstacles, and each time, she had risen. It wasn't just about the promotion. It wasn't just about the title or the paycheck. This was her moment to show the world and herself that she had always been capable of greatness. She just needed the chance to prove it. And now she had that chance. A week after the promotion was announced, Maggie found herself in the company's monthly all-hands meeting, standing on stage in front of the entire staff. Her team sat in the front row, their faces full of pride as she prepared to speak. "Maggie, if you would like to say a few words?" Andrea's voice came from behind her. Maggie nodded, the spotlight making her feel both nervous and empowered. She took the microphone and faced the room. "Thank you, Andrea," she began, her voice firm but warm. "When I first started at this company, I wasn't sure I belonged. But each of you showed me that it's not about being the loudest in the room. It's about finding your voice, listening to others, and leading with integrity. I've learned more in these past few months than I ever could have imagined. And I'm excited to continue this journey with all of you. Together, we're going to do something extraordinary." There was a moment of silence, and then the room erupted into applause. It wasn't just a moment of validation for Maggie. It was a moment of clarity. She had arrived. She was no longer the girl who had to fight for a seat at the table. She was the one leading the charge. And this was only the beginning. Maggie's new role had come with its fair share of triumphs. But as the days passed, it also brought its own set of challenges. The weight of leadership pressed on her, the decisions she made now impacting not just the company but the lives of the people she had grown to care about. She had learned quickly that being a leader wasn't about making the right decisions every time. It was about learning from the wrong ones and adapting. Still, there were moments when the pressure felt unbearable. And then there was the rejection. It came on a Friday afternoon, just as Maggie was heading out of the office. She had been working on a proposal for a partnership with a major tech firm, one that could elevate startup tech to a whole new level. This deal was crucial. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the validation. It was about showing the world that the company, under her leadership, had the potential to change the game. The rejection email hit her inbox at 4:30 p.m., just before the end of her workday. She opened it without thinking, only to be met with the words she had feared. "We regret to inform you that we have decided to move forward with another partner." Her stomach dropped. Felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. This deal had been her brainchild, her vision, and to see it rejected was a blow she wasn't sure how to recover from. Maggie stood in her office, staring at the screen, her fingers trembling as she clicked the email closed. She had poured everything into this. Her team had worked countless hours, sacrificing weekends and nights to perfect the proposal. It had been her responsibility to make sure they succeeded. And now, in one moment, it was all undone. Was I wrong? Was I not good enough? The familiar thoughts crept in, threatening to drown her in self-doubt. Her phone buzzed on the desk, but Maggie didn't move to answer it. She just stood there, feeling defeated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. And then the door to her office opened. "Everything okay?" It was Andrea, her voice soft, but carrying that unmistakable authority that Maggie had come to respect. Maggie looked up, blinking away the tears that had started to form. She didn't want to show weakness, but it was impossible to hide the devastation in her eyes. "They rejected us?" Maggie whispered, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "The deal, the partnership, all of it." Andrea stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "I know you're disappointed," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But this isn't the end. We knew it was a long shot. This company has been through much worse. What matters now is how you respond." Maggie nodded, but she couldn't find the words. She felt like she had failed. Not just herself, but her team, the company, and Andrea, who had put her faith in her. Andrea placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay to be upset, but don't let it define you. You're a leader, Maggie. And leaders don't quit when things don't go their way. They learn from it, they adapt, and they come back stronger." Maggie swallowed hard. She wanted to believe Andrea's words, but it didn't feel that simple. The rejection felt like a personal failure, a confirmation that she wasn't capable of leading the company to where it needed to go. "I'm scared," Maggie admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought I was ready for this, but maybe I'm not." "You are ready," Andrea said firmly. "And this is just a setback, Maggie. Every successful leader has faced rejection. It's how you rise from it that matters." The following week, Maggie did what she had done so many times before. She threw herself into work. She could still feel the sting of the rejection, but she knew that she couldn't let it control her. She had made a promise to herself, to her team, and to Andrea that she would be the leader they needed. That meant facing failure head-on and learning from it. She called a meeting with her team, determined to lead them through this setback. The room was quieter than usual, the weight of the recent rejection hanging over them all. Maggie stood at the front, looking at the faces of the people she had come to rely on. They were all waiting for her to say something, but Maggie didn't know where to start. "You're probably wondering what happened," she began, her voice steady but reflective. "I'm sure you all feel just as disappointed as I do. This was a big opportunity, and we put everything into it. But the fact is, we didn't get the deal. And that's okay." She paused, letting the words settle. She could feel the eyes of her team on her, waiting to see how she would handle this failure. They were looking to her for strength, for guidance. "We made a great proposal. We gave it everything we had, but it wasn't the right fit, and that's something we have to accept," Maggie continued. "But this isn't the end of the road. Far from it. We've got a team of brilliant minds here, and we're just getting started. What matters now is what we do next. We're going to learn from this, adapt, and keep moving forward." Leo, the data analyst, spoke up first. "You're right, Maggie. We gave it our best shot. But we've got other opportunities, right? Let's use this as a lesson and keep pushing forward." Madison, the lead designer, nodded in agreement. "Exactly. We've done great work so far. One rejection isn't going to stop us." Maggie smiled, relieved to see the team rallying around the idea of moving forward. It wasn't easy, and the disappointment was still there, but the fire that had driven them all in the first place was still burning. They weren't done. Not by a long shot. "I'm proud of each and every one of you," Maggie said. "This setback doesn't define us. What defines us is how we respond. And I know we're going to come back stronger." In the weeks that followed, Maggie and her team focused on recalibrating. They revisited their strategies, fine-tuned their processes, and sought out new opportunities. They didn't wait for success to come to them, they went out and found it. And it came. The following month, they secured another deal, a better deal. One that not only made up for the loss but put them in a stronger position than they had been before. The client was impressed with the improvements Maggie and her team had made since the initial rejection. And this time, there was no hesitation, no doubts. It was a victory, but it didn't feel like a celebration. Instead, it felt like the natural outcome of all the hard work, the resilience, and the commitment Maggie had cultivated in herself and her team. One evening, After the deal had been signed and the work was underway, Maggie stood by her office window once again, looking out at the glowing skyline of Chicago. The city was buzzing, the lights reflecting the energy she felt inside. She thought back to that Friday afternoon when the rejection had nearly broken her. How far she had come since then. She had learned that leadership wasn't about always getting things right. It was about accepting failure, learning from it, and continuing to push forward, no matter the setbacks. Her phone buzzed. It was Andrea. "Great job, Maggie. You handled everything with grace. Proud of you." Maggie smiled, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. She wasn't just proud of the deal they had secured. She was proud of how she had led her team through the toughest moments, how she had stayed true to herself, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into this company months ago. She was a leader now, and she had earned it. It was a Monday morning, and the energy in the office was palpable. Maggie had just walked in, and already, the team was gathered around their desks, talking in hushed tones, as if something important was about to unfold. She couldn't help but feel the familiar rush of anticipation in her chest. After the deal they had secured last month, everything had changed. The company's growth felt different. Today, she could sense something shifting in the air. She was no longer just a participant in the process. She was the one everyone was turning to for direction, and the realization was both humbling and exhilarating. Maggie walked into her office and placed her bag down on the desk. She caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the glass window, the same woman who had entered this building months ago, unsure of her place. But now something was different. She no longer felt out of place. She felt like she belonged. She had built something here, not just in terms of deals and strategies, but in relationships and trust. She had earned the right to sit at the table, and she was ready to make her mark. The door to her office opened, and Andrea stepped in, a smile on her face. Maggie looked up. "Morning," Andrea said, her tone warm but purposeful. "Got a minute?" Maggie nodded, gesturing for Andrea to sit. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "We've been doing a lot of reflection as a company lately, looking at where we've come from and where we're going. And I wanted to talk to you about something important." Maggie straightened, her heart skipping a beat. There was something in Andrea's tone that suggested this conversation was going to be more significant than just another update. "You've done an incredible job with your team," Andrea continued. "The company is growing, but it's more than that. The culture you've fostered, this environment of collaboration, of respect and empowerment, it's becoming the backbone of everything we do here. People are starting to look at you as a role model, Maggie. And I think it's time we take that into account when we think about our future." Maggie's mind raced as Andrea spoke, the weight of her words sinking in slowly. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice steady, though she felt the rising tide of possibility swell within her. "I'm suggesting that we consider you for a larger role, Maggie, a more strategic one. You've demonstrated time and again that you're more than capable of leading this company. Not just through your technical expertise, but through your ability to inspire people and make them believe in the work they do." Maggie paused. She hadn't expected this. She had grown accustomed to being in the trenches, leading from the front. The idea of stepping into a more senior, strategic role wasn't one she had considered seriously, at least not yet. But now, as she listened to Andrea's words, she realized that this was the natural progression. It was a reflection of how far she had come. It was a sign that her quiet power had started to transform not just the company, but her own trajectory. "Andrea," Maggie said, her voice calm but sincere, "I'm honored, but I have to be honest. I don't feel like I've finished what I started with the team. We've made incredible progress, but I know there's so much more we can do. I don't want to leave them behind." Andrea smiled. "That's exactly why you're the right person for this role. You're not the type to leave anyone behind. But you need to take the next step if you want to take the company and your team to the next level. This position isn't just about you. It's about continuing to lead them to the success they deserve." Maggie thought for a moment. She had been the one leading her team to this point, guiding them through uncertainty and rejection. helping them achieve goals they hadn't thought possible. But now she realized she had the chance to do something bigger. She had the opportunity to shape the future of the company, to create the kind of environment that had helped her succeed. One where quiet strength, collaboration, and innovation thrived. "I'm ready," Maggie said, the words coming to her with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt before. "Let's do this." The next few days were a whirlwind. Maggie met with the executive team to discuss the details of her new role and the responsibilities that came with it. She would be stepping into a more strategic position, overseeing multiple projects and departments, working closely with Andrea and the senior leadership team to set the vision for the company's future. It was a step up in every sense of the word, bigger meetings, bigger decisions, and more pressure. But Maggie was ready. She knew she had the tools to succeed. Her first official meeting in her new role was with the entire company. Maggie had always believed in leading with transparency, and she wasn't going to change now. She knew that if she was going to ask the team to follow her, she had to show them the way. And the way was to be honest, to acknowledge the past while looking forward to the future. She stood in front of the room, a mix of familiar faces and new ones, and spoke with the same quiet strength that had gotten her this far. "I want to thank each of you for your dedication," Maggie began, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "We've achieved so much in the past year, but we're just getting started. As I step into this new role, I want you to know that my focus will always be on our team, on each of you. We are here to support one another and push each other to be better, to do better." She paused, letting her words sink in. She could feel the weight of her team's eyes on her. But this time, it wasn't pressure. It was trust. "We have big goals ahead of us. We're going to continue growing, we're going to innovate, and we're going to face challenges. But we're going to do it together. And no matter what comes our way, I promise you this. I will lead with integrity, with respect for each and every one of you. We are stronger together, and we will succeed because of that strength." The room was silent for a moment, and then, slowly, the applause began. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but it was sincere. Maggie smiled to herself. She wasn't there for the applause. She was there to lead. In the weeks that followed, Maggie's new role brought fresh challenges. The stakes were higher, the decisions more complex, and the pressure more intense. But with every challenge, Maggie found herself growing more confident in her ability to lead, not just through knowledge, but through empathy and understanding. She was no longer the person who had to prove herself. She was the person others looked to for guidance. One afternoon, Maggie was in the middle of a meeting when her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. It was a simple message, but one that struck her deeply. "I'm so proud of you, Maggie. You've come a long way, and you're only just getting started." Maggie smiled as she read the message, the weight of Sarah's words settling in. She had always been the one who struggled with believing in herself. But now, as she looked at the team around her, as she saw the respect they had for her and the trust they placed in her, she realized that she had finally found her place. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a leader. And as the days passed, Maggie knew that she wasn't done yet. There were still mountains to climb, still challenges to face. But she was ready for whatever came next. Her quiet power had been the key to her success, and now it was the key to leading her team to new heights. It had been a year since Maggie's first day at Startup Tech. A year since she had walked into this building unsure of herself, unsure of whether she belonged in the world of high-stakes tech. Now, as she looked out of her office window, the view of Chicago stretching before her, Maggie couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She wasn't the same person who had walked into the company all those months ago. The fears, the doubts, the uncertainty. They were still there, lurking in the background at times, but they no longer controlled her. She had learned to lead, not just with expertise, but with empathy, authenticity, and a quiet strength that had resonated with her team. They had come to respect her, not because of her title, but because of the person she was. The company had grown over the past year, as had she. They had expanded their projects, doubled their client base, and secured several major partnerships. But through it all, Maggie had remained focused on what mattered most: the people she led. And now, the stakes were higher than ever. There was a new project on the horizon. A massive, high-profile deal that could elevate the company to an entirely new level. But with it came a new set of challenges that would test Maggie's leadership like never before. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning. Maggie had spent the last several days preparing the final details of the proposal, working alongside her team to ensure that every aspect of the project was accounted for. It wasn't just about meeting the client's expectations. It was about exceeding them. Maggie knew that this project would be the defining moment of her leadership. But as the day approached, a familiar feeling crept in: anxiety. It wasn't the kind of anxiety that crippled her. It was the kind that made her push harder, think more deeply, and refine her approach until it was perfect. She had faced rejection before. She had faced failure. But this was different. The pressure felt heavier, the consequences more far-reaching. Maggie sat in her office, reviewing the proposal one last time, when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Andrea. "Ready for tomorrow? We've got this. You've got this." Maggie stared at the words for a moment. There it was again. The unwavering belief that Andrea had always shown in her. She wasn't just the CEO. She was a mentor, someone who had pushed Maggie to reach her potential. And now, Andrea's faith in her was the reminder Maggie needed. She couldn't let fear hold her back. Not now. Not when they were so close to achieving something extraordinary. Maggie stood up, walking to the window. She looked out over the city once more, taking in the skyline, the streets below bustling with activity. This is my moment, she thought. This is the moment I've been working for. The next morning, the conference room was filled with energy. The client's representatives, a powerful group from a multinational tech conglomerate, were sitting across from Maggie and her team, their eyes fixed on her as she began the presentation. The room felt smaller than it had before, the weight of the expectations heavy on her shoulders. She could feel the sweat building on the back of her neck, but she pushed the discomfort away. This wasn't about her, it was about the company, about the vision they had built together. "Maggie," Andrea said, smiling from her seat at the table. "You've got this. Go ahead." Maggie took a deep breath and began. The slides clicked smoothly behind her as she outlined the proposal. Every detail carefully considered, every potential obstacle addressed. She talked about the company's capabilities, the innovative approaches they had taken, and how this project could change the landscape of the tech industry. But as she spoke, her mind wandered. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the late nights, the rejections, the doubts. She thought about her team, the people who had supported her every step of the way. She thought about the small apartment in South Philly, about the girl who had once believed she didn't belong in a world like this. And then, Maggie found herself speaking from the heart. "This project isn't just about technology," she said, her voice steady but passionate. "It's about people. It's about how we create solutions that empower those who will use them. We believe in a future where technology doesn't just serve the few. It serves everyone. And we're ready to make that future a reality, not just for you, but for all of us." The room fell silent. Maggie's words hung in the air, powerful and vulnerable, and she could see the shift in the client's representatives. They weren't just hearing a proposal anymore. They were hearing a vision. And Maggie realized in that moment that this was the true power of leadership. Not just the ability to manage, but the ability to inspire, to make others believe in something bigger than themselves. The meeting ended, and Maggie sat in the conference room, her hands shaking slightly as she reviewed the notes. It had gone well, better than well. She could feel it in the air, in the way the clients had responded to her presentation, in the way her team had rallied around her. They had believed in her vision, just as she had believed in theirs. As they filed out of the room, Andrea caught Maggie's eye. She walked over, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," she said quietly, her voice full of pride. "That was exactly what we needed. You're ready for this. The company is ready for this." Maggie smiled, a quiet smile that didn't need words. She had faced the hardest test of her leadership yet, and she had passed. She wasn't just managing a team anymore. She was leading them towards something greater than any of them had ever imagined. A few days later, Maggie received the email. The client had signed the deal. Her heart raced as she read the words. It was official. They had secured the project. The team had succeeded, and Maggie's leadership had been the driving force behind it all. She sat in her office for a long time, the reality sinking in. This was more than a business deal. It was a symbol of everything she had worked for. It was proof that the quiet strength she had nurtured within herself was enough to lead others, to change the course of their futures, and to create something extraordinary. As she looked out at the city once again, Maggie allowed herself a moment of reflection. The journey had been long, and the road ahead would be filled with new challenges. But she was ready. She had proven to herself that she could lead, not just in moments of triumph, but in moments of failure. She had learned that true leadership was about resilience, vision, and the ability to inspire others. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Sarah. "I saw the news." Sarah's voice was filled with excitement. "You did it, Maggie. I knew you would." Maggie smiled, her heart light. "We did it, Sarah. The team did it. This isn't just my success. It's ours." She hung up the phone, her heart full. The journey wasn't over. There were more mountains to climb, more battles to fight. But now, Maggie knew that no matter what came next, she had the quiet strength to face it. She wasn't just leading a company anymore. She was leading a movement. And this was only the beginning.